Effectively engaging fathers of color.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to session 3C, a Planning for Action session, where we will explore the topic of effectively engaging fathers of color. My name is Arlene Jones, and I'm a family consultant with the Center for States. Joining me and co-facilitating this session is Devin. And Devin, I invite you to come off mute and introduce yourself.
Hello all, I'm Devin Washington. I'm a mental health therapist with Conquering Walls out of Columbus, Ohio.
Thanks, Devin. And so we'd also like to take this time to acknowledge George Gable with the Center for Tribes and all of the work and contributions that he did as far as planning and designing our session for today. So at this time, we want to welcome all of you to introduce yourselves by typing your name and where you're joining us from into the chat as we prepare to transition to our next slide. I'm seeing Washington, D.C. come in. Hi, Eugene.
Hello.
Hi, Jamie Albee. Oh, Ohio, Louisiana, Arizona. All right, lots of folks. So before we dive into the content that we've prepared, we just have a few virtual housekeeping reminders for everyone to keep in mind during today's session. Your microphone and video capabilities are disabled and will remain so throughout the presentation. However, we strongly encourage everyone to contribute to today's session via chat. We do have a lot to cover during this 45-minute session, so we apologize in advance if we are unable to respond to all of the questions or comments that are entered into the chat. And also just a friendly reminder that we do have supplemental materials in the Resource Center, which may be helpful in addressing questions or comments that we don't have an opportunity to get to. And one final note, if you experience any technical issues, please let us know in the chat and a technical support team member will reach out. So with housekeeping all wrapped up, let's take a look at our agenda for the day. Our approach to the session is very straightforward, as you can see, because the goal is to allow space for everyone to share their thoughts and ideas on the discussion topics that are prepared. After this slide, we'll segue into some definitions and level setting to help create a common ground for the work that we'll be doing together. After reviewing the definitions, we'll transition to the interactive portion of our agenda, which will be kicked off by a poll, followed by the proverbial meat and potatoes of our session. We'll present three discussion topics present three discussion questions on the topic of engaging fathers of color with a race equity lens at the case, peer, and systems level. As responses come in, they will be posted as sticky notes onto the Google Jamboard that is being presented before you today by our magnificent technical support team who are working behind the scenes to make this magic happen. Finally, we'll close out our time today with a brief recap of the work that we've done together, a celebration of our accomplishments, and information on what's next. One last thing before we transition, the Google Jamboard link is included in the supplemental materials located in the Resource Center, so you can access it after today's session. So now I invite my co-facilitator, Devin, to take the lead as we head into the definitions and level setting component of today's session.
Thank you, Arlene. And as mentioned, this is going to be a very, very interactive session. The discussion questions were prepared with focus on how to distinguish equity from equality, understanding the difference between interacting with a father versus engaging a father, identifying how current practice, policy, and programming supports equitable engagement of fathers, barriers and challenges that impact the equitable engagement of fathers, and identifying next steps that enhance current practice and policy of engaging fathers, specifically fathers of color. Moving on to our next slide. So as we head into the definitions section, we do want to ensure that everyone is coming in with the same understanding of some key concepts and terms. During this session, you can expect to hear the words racial equality and racial equity. Understanding that what these terms mean, especially in the context of the work that we'll be doing today, will help to ensure that you have a shared understanding. As you can see, racial equality and racial equity have contrasting definitions, where racial equality assumes everyone is starting from the same place, that everyone has the same resources, and if everyone takes advantage of all the opportunities afforded to them, the resulting outcome should be the same across the board. And racial equity acknowledges that people are not always starting at the same place, that everyone does not have the same resources, and that there are systematic and institutional barriers in place that prevent people from accessing opportunities. These very different concepts impact how we approach our work and lead to different outcomes. Now that we understand the difference between racial equality and racial equity, let's discuss how we'll be defining engagement. So according to the Administration for Children and Families, IM 19-03, family engagement is defined as a family-centered and strengths-based approach to making decisions, setting goals, and achieving desired outcomes for children and families. As the definition indicates, engagement is all about the inclusion of the entire family's voice, fathers and paternal relatives included, at the case, peer, and system level. A few concrete examples of what this can look like include engaging with fathers and paternal relatives as frequently and as often as mothers and maternal relatives, consistent contact with fathers and paternal relatives, providing an array of case services that are geared toward meeting the supportive needs of fathers, forging partnerships with organizations and agencies that advocate for the relationship between fathers and children, and providing professional and development opportunities that equip staff with the knowledge and skills to effectively engage our fathers. Engagement is essential to creating space that supports equity for fathers of color, as equity can only be achieved if the work culture supports and values the voice of fathers and their vital role in the family unit. Now that we've established some common ground, we'll move on to a quick poll on the topic of fathers of color and equity. So at this time, we'd like to ask our super helpful technical support team to pull up our poll. Thank you. It should show up as a dialog box on your screen. If you don't see it, please let us know in the chat. We invite everyone to take a moment to reflect on the definitions that were provided and enter your response to our poll. To our poll question, I'm sorry. My agency applies a race equity lens when working with fathers of color. If you do not work with a specific agency, we invite you to enter your response based on your experiences working with or partnering with an agency or organization that does engage fathers. So we'll spend about a minute or two here to allow for everyone to respond. Okay, many thanks to all of you. At this time, we are going to close out the poll and have a look at the results. And it looks like for the most part, mostly everyone agrees. We do have some that disagree, some strongly disagree, but for the most part, everyone is in agreement, and some strongly agree as well. That's wonderful. Again, many thanks to all of you for participating in the poll. Up next, Arlene will be asking some feedback from all of you about your expectations of this session. Arlene, you're up.
My apologies, fighting with my mute button over here. So thanks, Devin. As Devin said, we are very interested in learning more about your hopes for today's session. So if everyone could please respond to the prompt that you see on your screen. The one thing I hope to take away from today's session is, and as you think about that, just type that into the chat so we can all see what the expectations are. And we'll take about a minute here just to see what folks are thinking and what your expectations are. So just one thing that you plan to take away from today's session to help us as facilitators and to also facilitate that conversation. So I'm seeing how to engage fathers, tools for improving father engagement. Yes, thanks, yes. A helpful tool to engage fathers, strategies on engaging fathers, how to be a better advocate, ideas on getting non-involved fathers engaged and involved in the lives of their children. We've got about 30 seconds left before we transition, so please feel free to continue contributing those responses. I see more knowledge is a theme that's emerging. How to get the parents to work together. Thank you for sharing that one.
Good.
Learning more about engaging fathers and learning anything that I can. Partnering with fatherhood organizations. Let me see, there are some few more down here. How to reach fathers from a lens not designed to see them. Yes, paternal family engagement skills and healthy adult relationships. So all of these are things that, while we may not be able to get to all of them, please remember that we do have supplemental resources at the Resource Center, and we will also be engaging in some very meaty discussions to be able to address some of those. So many thanks to everyone for sharing your hopes for today's session. And now we are actually going to transition to the meat and potatoes for our session, which is our discussion questions. So as we transition and move forward, we do have a question, our first discussion question. So as we open this up, the first question that we have before us is, what are some strategies to advance equity when engaging fathers of color? And so as you type, and we'd like for you to type your responses into the chat, and as you do that, we encourage you to think of strategies at the case, peer, and systems level. And so an example of a case level strategy could include increasing the frequency of visits with fathers to support their involvement in the case, or even maintaining the same reunification and permanency focus with fathers, even when they are not the primary caregiver. So that's a case level example. At the peer level, a strategy could be to identify existing affinity groups for fathers of color and support those dads with the desire to be engaged in that affinity group, or even creating a fatherhood committee that is demographically representative of fathers being served by your agency. And then another one at the systems level specifically is advancing equity for fathers of color by developing partnership with local community organizations to not only help identify and locate fathers, but to also engage them in the case planning process. So please throw those suggestions in the chat. Devin, did you have some other potential examples here?
Yeah, no, this is a really good question. And I would say that presenting fathers with opportunities to have a seat at the table throughout, the whole case process is something that I feel is very important, especially in the case planning. And that could help to advance equity. In my experience, some fathers are left out of the case process for numerous reasons that continue to contribute to their loss of equity. So just keeping fathers in mind, like we said earlier, being constantly referring back to fathers, paternal sides of the family and things like that could definitely help these efforts.
Thanks, Devin. So I am seeing lots of things pop up on our Jamboard here. How to help a father learn to use his court-appointed attorney and get better advocation. That is definitely a case level strategy right there, because that requires some actual one-on-one engagement, including fathers in case decisions from the beginning. Again, another case level strategy that's amazing. I see someone wrote peer here, peer at the peer level, support from fathers aligned with similar characteristics, likenesses, concerns, and issues. Absolutely. And then also engaging the fathers who are not the custodial parents at the case level, reaching out and asking them what their barriers are. And then asking fathers what supports they may need. I'm seeing improving communication and engagement on the development of case service plans. And so there's a lot of good thoughts here. Again, we do encourage collaboration inside of the chat. I am seeing a systems response here about using the Fatherhood Initiative to help improve some of those equity engagement strategies for fathers of color. I see Tracy put in the chat that when when they had their cases, they made sure to engage the fathers with every step, from case planning to weekly meetings to answering all the questions. And again, these are case level strategies. And then also asking fathers what they would want for their children and what their children need, from Dana. So again, I see a system response, social welfare workers seeing and understanding fathers' value. Absolutely, yes. Yes, so we encourage you to throw those responses out there. And also you can talk amongst yourselves in the chat, collaborate amongst yourselves in the chat. As you see something that comes up, if somebody puts in something that you didn't think of before, we encourage you to, pop in a comment or a kudo or anything like that to that specific response. So I am also seeing including them, not making a decision without them. I see here, Oh, I read that one. I apologize. Engaging community agencies to start programs for fathers. And again, that's something that is definitely at the systems level, making sure that you have all the community stakeholders at the table so that they can help with that process. Supporting fathers through the legitimation process. Making sure fathers are included in all court processes. And that's something that can, take some time.
Seeing a lot of implementing fatherhood support groups, within the systems or agencies. I think that's really good.
Are there others that are standing out for you, Devin?
Developing father-specific services. Those are much needed. And I seen one earlier that spoke about working with the Fatherhood Initiative. I think that's really good. There are already programs out there that I believe if agencies and the two agencies got together, they can make a huge difference in this process. And they could both advocate for each other and advocate for more equity for these fathers. So.
Yes, and I really want to call out the one on educating on self-advocacy, because that is something that fathers, that we want to make sure that fathers are receiving, specifically fathers of color, as there may not be this inherent sense of having a connection or power to that, to the case. So just letting fathers know, hey, these are things that you can advocate for yourself for, and this is how you go about doing it. So making sure that not only do they have the information about the resources, but how to access it as well. So thank you for sharing that. And I see one that just popped up, at the system level, meaningful engagement with incarcerated fathers. And that's something that could actually go at the case, peer, and system level, depending on what that looks like. At the case level, that could look like engaging a cohort of fathers who are incarcerated, and doing that in a meaningful way. At the peer level, that could look like a cohort of fathers who are supporting each other through the process of being incarcerated, while also still trying to be a positive presence in their child's life. And then at the systems level, creating policies that support that. Go ahead, Devin, I yield the floor.
And I see a good example, a good response is Tina wrote, understanding and respecting their past traumas from society. And I think that's huge, so kudos to you, Tina, for putting that out here.
Thanks, yeah. I see including paternal grandparents.
Yeah, that's a good resource. Those are really good resources.
Althea wrote, holding accountable the organizations funded to support the Father Initiative programs. Yes. Mosley wrote down for as a peer level, having advocates help other fathers navigate through the child support and court system, from a handout to a help up. Exactly, yes. So that would definitely be helpful in my experiences in working with fathers, especially as a former child welfare caseworker. We've had to help fathers connect with one another to be able to learn how to navigate that system, and those who have lived experience navigating those systems, because when it comes from another agency, that can not be perceived as well. Devin, were there others that were standing out to you?
Let me see. I mean, there's a lot of them that are standing out. Family tree data. I like that they're reaching out to the paternal grandparents. I think they will have a plethora of information there. They're sort of the source of the family. A lot of times, the grandparent, the role of the grandparents. So that would be great people to reach out to gather information. About the father, about maybe his relatives or places that he could potentially be.
Yeah. So I see a comment speaking specifically to digging into why a father may be resistant to engaging in services, making sure to just kind of look at that rather than making the assumption that a father may not care. So we are about to wrap up this specific discussion question here in a sec. Please feel free to continue contributing in the chat to this question. But for now, I'm going to highlight some of the themes, some of the emerging themes that have come out of this, which include engaging those fathers who are incarcerated, or fathers who have not necessarily been engaged from the beginning of a case. Also making sure that fathers are not only informed of how to self-advocate, but also given the resources to do that, while also respecting their past trauma, whether that's systems-induced trauma or their own battles with trauma, whether that was from them growing up and experiencing some adverse childhood experiences. And also making sure that staff has what they need to support fathers and being engaged, whether that's training, professional development, coaching, whatever that looks like at an agency. And then making sure that we are very cognizant of asking fathers very directly, what supports do you need and what resources would be helpful to you? So I see a lot of good responses here. Lots of, I see some case peer system level responses.
That's a resource that was shared by Mosley. So that's really good.
Oh, I missed that. Did you see it, Devin?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I see it. It's in the chat.
So someone from Texas shared a resource from the Fatherhood Resource Hub. So
thank you for sharing that.
A really good answer.
Thank you. And so what we are going to do now is we are going to transition to our next slide here. And this one is specific to barriers. And I'm actually going to pass the leadership baton over to my co-facilitator, Devin, on this particular response. So we're going to transition from this Jamboard and allow you guys to answer this question. And we will again post those responses on the Jamboard.
So thank you all for your participation in this session. That was wonderful. That was a lot of beautiful information that was posted. So next we're going to pose the question, what kind of barriers have you encountered when engaging with fathers of color? I know for me, I've encountered many fathers that have expressed numerous barriers when engaging with child welfare system. One common systematic theme I hear is that they don't trust the child welfare system due to their beliefs that the child welfare system solely wants to speak to them in order to get in their business, with no care or support for them being reunified with their child. A peer level issue that has often been repeated is that the agency only has interest in the mom and her goals, which don't necessarily align with father and his goals. You know, a lot of times mother and father are sometimes, you know, not necessarily focusing on the best interest of the child. They're focusing on the best interest of themselves. And sometimes fathers feel like that mothers and their interests are solely being supported by the agencies. So another common barrier I've heard from fathers is that some fathers do not understand the importance of their own role in being a father, due to not necessarily having fathers in their own lives, due to not necessarily having any father figures, and even in society, like the role of the father is minimized, and in which, you know, the role of the father and the role of the mother is just as important. You know, you have children are both male and female. They need a female perspective and they need a male perspective just as much, so they can learn how to engage and just be productive citizens in the world. So I'm going to go and look up some of the responses that we have. Let me see. Some are trust issues with the system. Yes. Having no understanding of the system. Fear of criminal repercussions. Absolutely. I've heard that a lot. You know, I've even heard that some fathers, you know, unfortunately live a lifestyle to where they don't want to endanger their children, which is hard to deal with, but understandable, just due to you know, the lifestyle that they chose to unfortunately live. They take word of the mothers about the father and we don't reach out to them. I've seen that. I know working at the agency, there's plenty of times where there were no searches or anything completed for the fathers, or there may have been one search done for the father and that was it, because it was really easy to access the mother Whereas there are fathers, there are paternal relatives, as we've seen in the last Jamboard that someone mentioned. Arlene, did you have any that you thought about?
Sure, thanks, Devin. As I see it, that's some of them that I have already been mentioned, specifically around the strained relationships with any or all parties involved in a specific case for any number of reasons, whether that's past or current substance misuse, a history of family violence or unmet mental health needs, or even dad having the perception that systems favor mothers and favor mothers and their family over dad, which can oftentimes contribute to fathers feeling disempowered. And at the peer level, specifically when it's trying to engage with fathers of color, some of the barriers that I've seen are that some fatherhood initiatives or programs perhaps maybe feel out of reach or out of touch for fathers of color. So that's one of the peer level barriers that I have seen and that I'm aware of. And then at the system level, this can include things like policies and legislation in states that hold dads accountable and responsible as a parent, while also requiring that they involve the family court to have any of the privileges associated with being the parent to a child. So yeah, just I had those few. And so go ahead, Devin.
And I see a good case level example of just having the correct and current contact information. So Adam put having correct and current contact information to find them in the first place. I think that's so important. And a lot of times we rely on mom. We rely on the ease of access, oftentimes relying on mom, her word of mouth, and things like that. And that's not always in the best interest of the child, nor is it in the best interest of the father, in which both interests should be considered, but ultimately the best interest of the child should be carried out. I'm continuing to see not trusting the system, fathers growing up in the system and having trauma from that. Peer-to-peer advocacy is important in this process. Fathers too often feel devalued. Yes, being a father myself, I've felt that. I've witnessed that. I didn't feel valued, especially when it came to the mother in any system. In any systems, oftentimes we're even talking about schools. Schools will send mom all the information, but what if the child lives with the father? Same as the agency. What if the child was living with the father, but father didn't necessarily have custody? And then we have one of those scenarios where the agency is just going to solely look at mom. Believe that the system is biased against them. Custody is assumed to be with mom when there is no order in place. Father is still treated as if his voice or role doesn't matter. Really, yeah. Parents do not have a speaking relationship. And that definitely hinders the child. And like I said, typically in agencies and agency workers, we go off ease of access and who's right there? Mom. So I'm now going to go on to talk about some frequented themes that we see here on this Jamboard. So having no understanding of the system, yes, afraid to ask for help, right? Sometimes just being a man, growing up as a man, you're taught to do things on your own and not necessarily do that. So it's not the most comfortable feeling, asking for help. Trust issues with the system. I continue to see that. Feeling judged for their past. Low self-efficacy in their children's lives. Yeah, not even understanding their roles, not even understanding the role of the father. Let me see. Unaware of their parental rights, exactly. And not even wanting to advocate for themselves or go through the whole court process. I know here in Ohio, as a father, if you're not married to the mother, you don't have any rights. So these are old systematic issues that take place that continue to hinder the father.
And if I may, Devin, there's one that Georgia put in that talks on jumping through the barriers put forth by jail systems to get services implemented can be troublesome. which again is something I've experienced, that I've heard and read about in the literature and the available resources around engaging fathers, specifically fathers of color, because it takes a great deal of effort to get the approval to visit outside of normal visiting hours. And then outside of getting the approval, it's getting the services in place. And the thing that really kind of all of that falls back on and trying to keep the focus on is that because a father's incarcerated doesn't mean that he can't be active or engaged in a case. And it's so great to hear that there are folks who are aware of that, as indicated on these barriers, which means that we know that we are trying. And so we only identify it as a barrier if it's gotten in the way.
Yeah. Two other good ones, and then we're going to transition to our next Jamboard. But I'm seeing generational trauma, which is a good one. Another might believe that the local department as a whole is racist. You know, when you're dealing with fathers of color, oftentimes you may feel that way. So yeah, thank you guys. Thanks everyone for your participation. We're going to transition onto our next Jamboard, and I'm going to turn it back over to my co-host, Arlene.
Thanks, Devin. So as we prepare to transition and contribute to our very last Jamboard, this planning for action session, apologies, is truly about thinking about an action step that you can take. So in our final discussion question, we really want to encourage everyone to think about all that was shared during this session, from the definitions to the sharing of strategies and barriers that we were all just discussing. And as you reflect on these things, we want you to respond to the discussion question that's on the screen, which is, within the next 90 days, what will you do to advance equity for fathers of color? And as you identify this one thing, try and focus on things that are within your own power. This means things that don't require a supervisor's approval for you to accomplish that action step, or a change in policy or practice. And again, just one thing that you can do that's within your power and that you can accomplish in the next 90 days, so that fathers of color can experience equity when being engaged in child welfare services. And so for some folks, this can be as simple as going to visit a father who is incarcerated, walking through that whole process. That can also look like identifying fatherhood groups, fatherhood affinity groups that are in your local area. And so those are just two examples of things that can be done. And so I'm seeing some things pop up here. I'm sorry, go ahead. Oh,
I
yes.
was going to just speak for myself. One thing that I'm going to definitely do when working with families is just explore their generational trauma. I really like that. And also explain more the value and the role of the father to the fathers, you know, to the hard to reach or hard to engage fathers of color, because they don't know what they don't know oftentimes. So.
Thank you for that, Devin. Yes, I specifically remember, for me, when I was a worker, when I was a CASA, and even as a trainer and consultant, I always encourage fathers, which was a mindset shift for me. So that's what I needed to do at my case level, my mindset shift at my case level, and as a trainer for child welfare agencies, that would be the systems level. What I did was I encouraged and trained folks on how to have a mindset change. And what that looked like was, and this specifically speaks to the comment that Caitlin has in the chat about the barrier of a parent not wanting to be involved because there's some blame on the parent who is, I'm gonna use air quotes here, at fault for the child being in care. And so being involved with the child welfare system. So one thing that I learned to do was to focus everyone's attention on the child well-being. As long as we're focused on the child well-being, nothing else matters. I am coming to you as a father to say, okay, well, how can we help little Arlene, leave this interaction better than when she came into it? And so that's one of the things I'm seeing populate on our Jamboard here, some of these responses. include them in the process and advocate for their needs and be intentional. Yes, that's definitely a 90 next day action step that can be taken. Go beyond asking the mothers for the father's information. Don't be so quick to assume blame. And listen to fathers of color, listen to learn. I really like that example or that action strategy, because it does change our mindset from, well, why are you doing this, to what happened to you, which is very important, because we're able to learn what happened to someone. We can understand why they respond in such a way. Also ensuring that a father's contact information is listed on referrals. Yes. So like making those referrals for services for a child, make sure the father's contact information is listed. I am also a kinship caregiver, and in my kinship caregiver role, I not only make sure that my contact information is listed, but my spouse's contact information is also listed, because he is in the role of a father for that child, for our relatives. So we want to make sure that that information is included in case they need to reach someone. Being conscious of the problem and educating others. I am seeing incorporate a race equity lens into our engaging fathers training. Absolutely. That one that's a good one, because once we understand that even with access to the resource, even with the resources being available, there are all of these systemic and institutional barriers in place that prevent folks from being able to access those resources. And so keeping that in mind and incorporating that race equity lens into your training on engaging fathers would be very helpful. Remove implicit biases first. The impression of the mother or the father's absence should not be a negative conclusion. Exactly, that does require that we address our own implicit biases. Being inclusive of fathers by asking them what their capacity to be supported looks and sounds like. I really love that one, because it really allows for the father to say, look, I may not be able to step into this specific role holistically because of my own issues right now, but if given the resources and the opportunity and the support, I could be able to do that, but I need this met first. It's like asking someone to pay bills inside of a house that they don't have yet. So you have to have the house first to be able to pay bills. Devin, are there any others that are standing out for you?
Yeah, one that talks about researching the father-specific initiatives and programs in the community, and I would go further and say sharing that with your agency, share it with your colleagues. I mean, sharing that with everybody. Consciously listening and asking the father, how can I help? That's so important. That just shows that you care, and oftentimes I've heard that the fathers feel that no one cares. They're worried about mom. They're worried about, reunifying the child with mom if the child unfortunately has been removed or things like that. So just listening to learn, and they said that earlier. And I think that's amazing. Providing fathers with written material, so some hands-on stuff that they can have regarding the importance of fathers in their child's life, because some of them just don't know. Some fathers have never had a father, have never had that paternal figure in their lives, and they just don't understand it, and they look out in society, and they live in society and see and feel the effects of and it kind of feels like mom matters. When people are talking about children, they're talking about moms. I mean, for me, being a father, and when I'm a father, I have custody of my daughter, and when I do things like fill out paperwork for school, and people give me praises, and I'm like, that's the same thing that the mothers do. I want that to be normalized, that fathers do these things. And the only way we can get to that is by continuing to uplift and support and provide, fathers with these materials and these skills to be just that for their children.
Thank you, Devin. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Great points. Yes. So we are just about to wrap up this Jamboard here in the next few seconds. So we encourage you to contribute your any additional action steps that you have in the next 30 seconds here, so we can transition out to prepare to close our session for the day. And so again, I really appreciate everyone who's contributed to this session and to help work across jurisdictions work across the nation together to help advance that equity for fathers of color. So we are going to my apologies. We're going to transition to our next and final slide here. And so with that, as we close out today's session, we just want to again thank all of you for sharing your time with us. We also want to remind you that the Resource Center has lots and lots and lots of supplemental information that are connected to this specific session. And that includes the link to the Jamboard that all of you were able to contribute to. And so you'll be able to see those responses in case you forgot any of them or anything like that, or something really stuck out to you and you were like, I want to look into that and revisit that. So yes, please visit the Resource Center to access the supplemental materials. We also encourage all of you to keep in mind that this Planning for Action session is a call to action. So with that being said, we completely invite you to keep asking yourself, what is it that's within my power that I can take action on and get that one thing done within the next 90 days, just one thing. And so again, many thanks to all of you. And as I prepare to sign off, I invite Devin for anything else that he'd like to add or say.
Oh, thanks so much, Arlene. And I want to thank everybody in attendance. I mean, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the responses and the participation. The work we all do is very important. And also so is the role of the father. You know, we have to inform these fathers. We have to let them know how important and how needed they are, especially in today's society. So I say, let's move forward with equity. Let's shift the roles and let's empower our fathers to instill greatness in their children. Thank you all.
Yes, definitely. Thank you all. And remember, continue to identify those next steps for accomplishing your action step. So many thanks to all of you. We hope that this session was informative and that it was helpful. And again, we encourage all of the collaboration throughout the rest of today's session. And so if there are additional questions or comments that you have, again, please feel free to reach out to each other. Feel free to access the Resource Center and the supplemental materials. We are hopeful, again, that this was helpful, and again, encourage and empower everyone to act on those next steps, those action steps. Thanks so much, and we hope that all of you have a great and wonderful remainder of your day.
This video was developed for the Child Welfare Virtual Expo by the Capacity Building Center for States and is sponsored by the Children's Bureau. Its content does not necessarily reflect the views and policy of the Children's Bureau.